mental and emotional expression. Now let us move into a more subtle and very revealing side of Kapha in the fifth house, the mental and emotional expression. In the earlier layer, we looked at how Kapha affects digestion, metabolism, hormones, and accumulation in the body. But here I want you to see something much more refined. When Kapha enters the fifth house strongly, it does not only slow the body, it also slows the style of thinking, feeling, remembering, and attaching. And that can be both a strength and a problem. You need to understand that very clearly. Because the fifth house is the house of creative intelligence, study capacity, memory, romance, emotional investment, and the way a person generates meaning from life. So when Kapha influences this house in a balanced way, it can give tremendous steadiness. The mind becomes patient, memory becomes stable, learning becomes consistent, emotions become loyal, creativity becomes enduring. I have seen in many charts that Kapha in the fifth house can produce people who do not learn quickly in a flashy way. But once they absorb something, they hold it for a very long time. That is the key word here, retention. And that is why this slide says Kapha stabilizes memory. This is actually a beautiful capacity. Such natives can have strong long-term memory, consistency in study, deep retention, and a very patient, sustained kind of creativity. Can you appreciate the fact that this is very different from Pitta brilliance or Vata inspiration? Kapha intelligence does not necessarily dazzle at first glance. It settles, it absorbs, it consolidates, it remembers by holding. That is why students with this pattern may not always be the quickest in the classroom, but very often they are the ones who keep knowledge with them over time. They may learn through repetition, familiarity, and emotional comfort with the subject. Once the material enters, it stays. And the same can be true in creativity. Kapha in the fifth house can give a person who creates patiently, carefully, and steadily. Their creativity may not be restless or aggressive. It may be devotional, methodical, layered, and quietly fertile. I have seen this especially in people who can build something over time. A body of work, a teaching style, a family culture, a craft, or a stable emotional bond with their audience. But, the same quality that gives stability can become inertia when excessive. And this is where the shadow side begins. Because when Kapha becomes too dominant in the fifth house, the mind may lose sharpness and mobility. Then the native can experience mental dullness, slow learning, low motivation, procrastination. Now this is important. You should not misunderstand slow learning here as lack of intelligence. Very often it is not lack of intelligence at all. It is that the mind becomes too heavy to activate quickly. There is resistance to ignition. The person may know they should act, study, create, or respond, but the inner system does not move easily. That is classic excess Kapha. I have seen many charts where the person says, once I start, I can continue, but starting is the problem. That is such a Kapha statement because Kapha resists transition. It likes continuity, familiarity, comfort, and emotional safety. So when the fifth house is overloaded with Kapha, the person may remain in known patterns for too long. And that is why the slide says creativity becomes heavy and resistant to change. That line is very profound. Because the fifth house is meant to create, it is meant to generate something new. But excess Kapha does not love the new. It loves the familiar. So the native may become repetitive in expression, slow to experiment, hesitant to take creative risks, or overly attached to what has already worked. Even their imagination may start operating inside the same safe circle. That does not mean there is no creativity. It means the creativity becomes comfort bound. You need to understand that subtlety. Now let us move into the emotional expression because this is where Kapha in the fifth house becomes deeply human. The slide mentions attachment in romance, possessiveness, fear of letting go, comfort seeking through food, and emotional dependency. This is one of the clearest emotional signatures of excess kapha because the fifth house governs not only romance but the joy of loving and being emotionally invested. So when kapha increases here, love does not always become fiery or dramatic. Instead, it becomes thick, sticky, and hard to release. The person may attach deeply, hold tightly, and struggle to move on even when the relationship has stopped growing. I have seen this many times. The native does not necessarily express love loudly, but once they are emotionally bonded, they do not let go easily. They may remain attached to an old lover, a child, a student, a creative project, or even an image of how life was supposed to feel. That is why fear of letting go is so central here. To appreciate how bodily and emotional kapha mirror each other. Just as the body retains fluid, the heart retains feeling. As metabolism slows, emotional release also slows. Just as the abdomen accumulates, the psyche accumulates. That is the beauty of this symbolism. Now, possessiveness here does not always look aggressive the way it might in Pitta. In Kapha, possessiveness often looks softer, sweeter, even caring on the surface. But underneath, there is a strong reluctance to release. The person may nurture, protect, feed, hold, and preserve. But there can also be an unspoken feeling of stay with me, don't change, don't leave, or don't disrupt what gives me comfort. That is why the final line of the slide is so strong. Love becomes clingy rather than expressive. That is exactly the issue. Because healthy fifth house love should flow. It should delight, create, inspire, bless. But under excess kapha, love can become less expressive and more adhesive. The person may not always know how to show feeling dynamically. Instead, they may show it through holding on, feeding, comforting, staying close, or expecting emotional sameness. And sometimes, when this becomes too much, the native may begin to seek emotional regulation through food, comfort habits, or familiar pleasures. That is why comfort seeking through food is such a revealing phrase here. The fifth house links emotion, digestion, and pleasure. So, under kapha dominance, the person may soothe feeling through consumption. Not necessarily because they are greedy, but because heaviness seeks more heaviness when it wants reassurance. I have seen this quite often. The person is not openly dramatic, openly confrontational. Emotionally, they become very attached to what gives them stability. Food, routine, familiar people, predictable affection, known emotional roles. And when those are threatened, the response is not always anger. Sometimes it is withdrawal, sometimes sadness, sometimes holding tighter. That is kapha. So in chart interpretation, when you see this kind of pattern, do not ask only whether the person is loving. Ask, is the memory strong but the learning pace slow? Is the creativity patient but resistant to change? Is romance affectionate but overly attached? Is emotional security becoming dependency? Is comfort becoming stagnation? Is the person nourishing love or clinging to it? Those are the real questions. And I have to say this very directly. One of the hidden difficulties of excess kapha in the fifth house is that it can make a person deeply sincere, loyal, and caring, yet still trapped by their own attachment patterns. They may not want intensity, they may not want conflict, they just do not want loss. That is the emotional heart of displacement. So, the final teaching I want you to take from this second kapha layer is this. When kapha increases in the fifth house, memory becomes stable, study becomes consistent, and creativity becomes patient. But if excessive, the mind turns dull, motivation drops, creativity resists change, and love becomes more clingy than free flowing. At its best, this gives deep retention, patient learning, steady creativity, emotional loyalty, and nurturing affection. At its excess, it becomes mental dullness, procrastination, low initiative, possessiveness, fear of letting go. comfort seeking and emotional dependency. So do not read this placement only as stable emotions or good memory. Read it more carefully, because sometimes what looks stable is actually stuck, and what looks loving is actually afraid to release. And once you see that um, Kapha in the fifth house becomes a very profound lesson in the difference between nourishing attachment and binding attachment.